Let me start.
Right.
Okay. So I wanted to be in close circles so that we can make focused questions, and then I will make it available to everybody through the YouTube. That's it. So if you wish, we can start. If you wish, everybody can say hi, and you tell us how you want it to go. First a little lecture, and then you take questions, or we go to the questions directly.
Well, I can take some time and just briefly describe something. Maybe also I might like to share a screen.
Excellent.
Okay. Well, in any case, my research started many years ago. And it started at Cornell University when I was in graduate school. It was research on diet and health, as you know. And then for many, many years after that, I was doing research with a lot of students, a lot of experiments. And I learned something that I didn't expect to learn. Basically, when I started my research, there's a picture. And you can see there that I started my research, I came from a farm where obviously we're producing milk and high protein product. Then in the second instance, I was doing my graduate research on advancing the use of protein because it's so important. Then after that, I spent some time working on a U.S. State Department project in the Philippines, responsible for setting up a program for feeding malnourished children. You can see that. All three cases, I believed in the value of protein. Protein is a very important nutrient, of course, but I believed, like my colleagues did, that animal-based protein was the best. So my graduate thesis here in the middle, that was for the purpose of promoting animal protein consumption. In the Philippines, we were working with malnourished children, and we wanted to make sure also they got enough protein. But in any case, as I'll see if I can skip over this here somewhat. Then I saw something that I didn't expect to see, and this is the case here, is an experimental animal study was done in India, where the idea was that for the formation of liver cancer, if they gave two different levels of protein, 20% of total calories and 5%, that the 20% diet should actually help to reduce the cancer because everybody thought protein was so important. And then they had 5% low. And the result they got was exactly the opposite. High consumption of protein gives 100% tumors. The lower percent protein, none. Both cases, these animals had been exposed to a carcinogen, the same amount. So in one case, the high protein, more cancer. That was a kind of a shock, exactly the opposite what I was trained to do in the beginning. So it was after that that I then got involved in doing some research on my own back home. And I wanted to show you about 2 slides. In this case here, what we're doing in this case is to see how to see how cancer grows. This is liver cancer. To see how it grows in the first 12 weeks. Fed 2 different levels of protein. One level, 20% protein. The cancer is growing really well. The other 5%, the cancer is not growing. In spite of the fact that both groups had the same mutated gene. In other words, they both started with a carcinogenic gene, but then fed 20% and 5%, and you can see the 20% is growing the cancer very well. So then I tried something different. I said, okay, what if we change the diet during this first 12 weeks? 20% in the first 3 weeks, right here. Switch it to 5%, turn the cancer off, and then turn the cancer back on and off. That was pretty spectacular because we always thought that cancer was a genetic disease, and you get cancer depending on which kind of genes you have. In this case, what we're seeing here is that even though we started with a genetic or gene, a mutated gene, the amount of protein is what determined whether or not the cancer grew. Okay? That we did many experiments like this. I just wanted to show you this one to show you that what this suggested to me, that a disease like cancer is a function of the nutrition, the protein, not the gene. The gene, yes, it starts it. The gene starts it, but it's the amount of protein being consumed that determines how much cancer we get. Okay, so then I'm going to skip over some slides if you don't mind, because I want to go then just keep that idea with you just for a moment. So we can turn cancer on and off by nutrition. We also know that if you have some genes that can give rise to cancer, that the cancer doesn't grow until you provide the right kind of nutrition. And that right kind of nutrition is a high protein consumption. So as I say, cancer, and the same is more or less true for heart disease and many other diseases. All the diseases start with genes, or a corrupt gene, a damaged gene. And then we eat the kind of food we do, and then that's what grows the cancer, the disease. So this incidentally is exactly the opposite what the cancer industry says around the world. Cancer researchers and cancer practitioners believe that cancer occurs because of whether or not we have the gene. So they say cancer is a genetic disease. That's a very important assumption for them, because what that means is that if we have the genes to get the cancer, we also know that these genes don't go backwards. In other words, the mutation that caused the gene in the first place, it doesn't go backwards, except very rarely. If that's the case, if we assume that, this means that cancer, once cancer starts to grow, it may take many years, it won't go backwards. And the only way we can treat cancer is with the use of chemicals, chemotherapy, for example, or surgery, or maybe radiotherapy, radiation therapy. So that's what we use to kill these cancer cells. We can't make them go backwards, so we have to kill them. So that is the cancer industry. What I'm showing here is almost, in many ways, almost the opposite. That I asked the question, why do we have to use chemicals or radiation or surgery to kill the cancer cells? If we just change our diet, that should maybe work. Well, in any case, that was some of the early research I was doing. It was just for background. And I want to tell you that when we ask questions about how much money we spend on cancer chemotherapy, we spend a lot, huge amount. Right here, you can see that it's over $1 billion for one drug. That's a huge amount. But actually, and without telling all the details here, it turns out that in 2004, some researchers analyzed the results of using chemotherapy for many cancer patients. And those results showed that the chemotherapy did not work very well. This is from about 30 years of research, thousands of patients. The chemotherapy only stopped the cancer in only 2% of the cases. That's miserable. So here's my point. We spent a huge amount of money on cancer chemotherapy. The oncologists, and they're treating patients, and sometimes it might work for a few months, or maybe 2 or 3 years even, possibly, on a couple of cancers, but generally speaking, it generally does not work. So at least it doesn't do much to extend life beyond 5 years. So what I'm saying here is that nutrition, if it's done right, should be able to control cancer. Now let me stop there just for a moment. I want to move on. Okay, you're not in biochemistry. I know you're in economics, so I won't get into this question. But basically, we learned how did it work? How did this protein work? And this is nothing more than a scheme showing a list of different kinds of, we call them mechanisms. And it doesn't work by just one mechanism. This is the first stage of cancer, and this is the second stage. It doesn't work just by one mechanism. And that, I have to say, is the essence of Western medicine. Western medicine, I think probably the same in Greece as here, Western medicine tends to make the assumption the way to treat disease is by using a drug, either to kill the cancer cell or do something else. And so those drugs are invented in order to hit one target, one mechanism. And so drugs do work for a while, but unfortunately, and for some diseases, the drugs might work for quite a little while. But in reality, these diseases are growing not because of one mechanism, they're growing because of a multitude of mechanisms. A multitude of mechanisms. That's the way that nutrition works. So this brings me to a very fundamental point. I say that if we ate the right food and get the right nutrition from that food, we can control or prevent a lot of diseases like heart disease, diabetes, chronic kidney disease, cancers, and so forth. We can prevent them. But even more interestingly, in a lot of these diseases, we can actually treat those diseases with nutrition. Not through the drugs. Yes, maybe the drugs sometimes it can help, that's for sure. But it's really nutrition that does that. Okay, so now let me move on here a little bit more. Now, one more thing. The protein that we were using in this research was animal-based. That's why I showed you in the beginning where I came from. So the high protein, in this case, casein, the protein of cow's milk, that protein is turning on the cancer. When we tried to use a plant protein, it didn't do it. So this was a sort of a new idea in some ways for me, because the protein of animal-based foods is harmful. The protein of plant-based foods is not. As long as we are consuming the whole food. So what this says is that we should really be consuming plant foods, not just because of the protein, but also because of many other things. Plants have a lot of antioxidants and complex carbohydrates and so forth and so on. So this is, I'm just giving this to you, not to elaborate very much. It's just kind of a summary. This is what happened. And so here's a list of a bunch of diseases for which there is evidence in the scientific literature, sort of the same thing. I talk about a so-called whole food plant-based diet. That's low in protein, only plant protein, of course. That kind of diet, is perfect. It basically, for all these diseases, it prevents, there's evidence, I should say this, there's evidence that it prevents, stops or suspends, or cures all these diseases. It's pretty amazing. This information here actually was available at the time that I wrote the China study with my son. You can see here that cardiovascular diseases, heart disease, multiple sclerosis, kidney stones, bone disease, osteoporosis, diabetes, so forth and so on. These diseases all seem to respond in the same way. Now, some of the diseases respond quickly, some maybe not. Some will respond better than others. But the point is that when we're consuming a whole food plant-based diet, if anything's going to happen, it's going to be to our benefit. The diseases will go backwards in many cases, or they won't occur in the first place. And so with that said, let me make the point here then that this dietary effect is broad. It's not just for cancer. It's not just for heart disease. It's very broad. It's just for general health. Even consuming this kind of diet even has been shown to improve physical performance, athleticism, sport. It's also very fast. It can happen within maybe sometimes within 1 day, 2 days, maybe sometimes a week or 2 weeks. Sometimes we see these benefits will appear maybe 2 or 3 weeks or a month or two later. But my point is the whole food plant-based diet, low in protein, that sort of keeps under control all of these diseases. Okay, so now let me, I'm going to skip some things here. As I say, we can use nutrition to treat illness. And that's very challenging for our medical system, because the medical system in Western medicine, as I'm sure you know, depends on the use of drugs. When in reality, we do a lot better by using this kind of diet. Okay, this is some results of my friend, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. This is kidney disease. This was my son. I won't go into those details there, but this has been published. This is now generally being accepted. I'm going to show you now just really quickly some general information on these different diseases. What I'm showing you here, this is the results of other researchers in the past 50 years. It shows, for example, in this little chart here, as animal protein is increased in different countries, Greece should be on there someplace, I'm not sure where. Oh yeah, there's Greece right there. So as animal protein is increased in the consumption, the risk of disease gets higher and higher. You can see the United States is up here. More breast cancer. Greece is lower. Greece is down here. Better diet. At least the old diet was in Crete and southern Greece. Okay, here's one. Plant protein. See that line there? Well, the first one, if we go back to the first one, right there, that regression line goes right through zero. What that says, hypothetically or theoretically, as soon as we start eating animal foods, the disease risk starts going up. And in the case of plant food, it doesn't do it. There's it doesn't cause changes in disease rates. Here's one for animal protein, and this is a cancer incidence, not mortality. Here's one for uterine cancer. Here's one for colon cancer, one for renal cancer or kidney cancer, one for prostate cancer. Here's one for heart disease, another for heart disease deaths. In other words, here's my point. This diet actually is pretty remarkable in the sense that if we eat a diet only containing plant-based foods, vegetables, fruits, grains, legumes, of course, if we eat that kind of diet, we're going to be the healthiest we can be. We do not need foods that have animal protein in, which means animal foods. Now, I won't go here because I want to stop, and so we can take some questions. This is only in reference to the fact that, well, I mentioned this briefly. This is in reference to the fact that politics becomes involved. I spent about 20 years involved in national policy development in Washington and other places. I worked I did a little bit of this in England and also in China. And what we do in different countries, we tend to emphasize the importance of consuming animal protein around the world. In some places like the United States and Europe, we really push it very hard. But, and it's really, this is the reason why we have so much heart disease, so much colon cancer, so much kidney. This is our problem. We're eating the wrong food. We're eating the wrong food. And so I'm going to just skip over this here real quick because I don't want to take up the time. I want to hear the questions. So I call this nutrition, holistic nutrition. Nutrition means that we assume that multiple nutrients work at the same time. That's the way it works. We can't take out one nutrient out of food and put it in a pill. We can't get results by doing that. It may have the opposite effect. So it's multiple nutrients. We have multiple mechanisms by which it works. We have lots of disease reversals or treatments now. And so we have multiple health improvements. And so that's my summary. And here's it says here, this is a highly interactive, integrated whole system without the cult of animal protein. Now, I was raised on a farm. I did my graduate research on trying to believe, I believe that with more animal protein foods we consume, the better we are. But what my research showed me over the last 60 years is exactly the opposite is true. So for me personally, this was a bit of a challenge for a while to really come to terms with this. But now, having done this for 30 years, my wife and I and our children, I'm now 86 years old. I don't use drugs. I'm still quite healthy. My wife is 79. She's the same way. And so I am really quite passionate about this idea, because I know that if the people in various countries were to understand this information, there would be a tremendous improvement in health, especially in Western countries. So, oh yeah, I'll tell you one more thing in summary. I just forgot this chart here. Oh yeah, I have 2 dietary goals. It's very complex science. It's very complex biochemistry, but I reduced it down to 2 ideas. Consume whole foods as much as possible. I know that you do that a lot in Greece. And some of the original research was done, as you know, in Greece and Crete and so forth, to kind of get to this point, and avoid animal-based foods. If we just do that and you don't need to think about too much else, we will gain most of the health we can gain. One more thing, at least in the United States, there's a big olive oil industry in the United States, as you may know. And of course, we know that olives are used in Mediterranean countries, especially Greece and so forth. I know that very well. But unfortunately, in the United States, we've taken the oil out of the olives. You probably do there too, I guess, but it's more like olive juice or something. But in this country, we use a lot of olive oil. It's refined. That's okay, but it's not a good idea. We use a lot of other oils too, which are probably worse. Olive oil is better than, let's say, corn oil or some of the other things. But still, using all that oil is not a whole food. That's my point. Using the oil or using added sugar, for example, is not a whole food. So we try to stick with this. And then in order to make the diet pleasant and enjoyable for different countries, let's say, we can use flavors and herbs and all kinds of things like that, combined foods. We end up with a very good diet. We just don't need to use the animal foods. And also we don't need to use a lot of supplements, nutrient supplements. That's not a whole food. In fact, supplements is another story, but supplements have a downside, unpredictable downsides sometimes. So my story is just that, very simply. I want to show you one thing here, one more thing. Yeah, this is something interesting here. In giving this talk in the United States and elsewhere, I'd like to show the impact this has on our economy, more in line with what you and your students are doing. Here's a ranking of countries in terms of the amount of dollars spent per capita. And see at the top here is the United States. We spend more dollars per capita on healthcare spending than any other country. I don't know where Greece is here. Let me see if I can find Greece. Where is it? There's Cyprus. There's Greece right there.
Yep.
It's quite a bit down the list. So you spend much less. We spend, you know, of course, and the world knows the United States is a very capitalistic country. From my point of reference, I'm a pretty severe critic of that kind of capitalism because I support the free market. That's not the issue. I appreciate that. But we do it excessively here. And so in the area of health, for example, new discoveries in health are more for the purpose of making money than making health. So as a result, we're paying a big price. We're paying a big price. Here's healthcare spending in the United States. Greece, you're better off, of course, you can see. So I say the reason we do this as a nation, any nation, I don't care if it's Greece or Germany or whatever, we tend to believe in food because this is what the industry wants us to believe in. It makes money. It's part of our economic systems. And it's also, we do that because the public tend not to know about nutrition. So I want to congratulate you and your students in your department taking an interest in this idea. Because if we just understood nutrition properly and let the public know through policy, then it could change things, I'm convinced, and really resolve some problems. Here in the United States also, here's another chart. This is the number of drugs we use spent in the United States, near the top. We're the highest user of drugs in the world. Makes money. But as you may have learned from my comments, this is not the way to practice health. We should practice it through diet and nutrition. Again, it's a question of just not understanding. In the United States, we spend a lot of money on drugs and so forth, but our life expectancy, look where we are. We spend the most money and we get much less in return. I don't know where Greece is on this. Let's see, where's Greece? Oh, right there. Yeah, Greece is here. Of course, it's not just a question of only spending money, we know that, but this is sort of an indicator of, our situation. Okay, there's the book that I published that you have probably read. That book now has actually sold 3 million copies and has been translated into 50 foreign languages. Apparently a record for a health book. And this is another book that I published, you may know that, Whole. And there I trying to explain what's the basis for my argument. And finally, here's a new book I'm coming out this year, near the end of the year. It's called The Future of Nutrition. And insiders look at the science, why we keep getting it wrong, and how to start getting it right. We have finished writing that book. I've written it with my grandson, actually, who's a writer, language expert. He's really, really good. And so this book is coming out in December of this year. Okay, then one more final thing. I have an online course. No, I don't get any money for this, so I don't take any salary. So, but we have a course that's in association with Cornell University. And it's all about plant-based nutrition. And this is some of the characteristics of it. We got different faculty working on it, and people can take this course from the professionals like medical doctors to anyone else. It's actually worked out quite well. We've had over 20,000 students now. Okay, I'm going to stop there. And there's one more piece we can go into, but later, and that is on the current coronavirus problem. Actually, and I'm just now writing an article for the Wall Street Journal that I hope will be published soon. And I've already sent a news release out on this. In China, when we were, I didn't tell you about China. We did a big study in China. You don't know about that. We surveyed the entire country. That was 130 villages, 130. And we also, that was about almost 9,000 people. And we collected all kinds of information because I wanted to know in a human population whether we could see the same kind of evidence for a human population as what we were doing in the laboratory. And sure enough, it was the same. Different countries, obviously all the countries, we have our own conditions, obviously. So it's not exactly a clean relationship, but nonetheless, it turns out that countries in the West, more industrialized, more, higher economic level. We also are suffering from some of the diseases of the so-called Western countries, as you know. So I'm going to stop there and then take questions. We'll have a discussion. Sorry, I went over.
That is fine. Thank you very much. It was a very nice summary, introduction, depends on who you are. Shall I try asking something about the virus that you mentioned? Because we have a list of questions that we want to ask you, but the most topical one is about how nutrition can protect us from viruses, especially zoonotic viruses like the one we're experiencing now. For me, because as you know, I'm vegan, I know that if everybody was vegan, the chances of new viruses emerging would be much less. But what I want to ask is whether this whole food plant-based diet can actually help people deal with viruses of this sort. Would you start with this?
Yeah, I can answer that. Actually, if I could go back to the share screen again, I'm not sure. I won't do it. I'll try to describe it. I've got some slides on there that help rather nicely. But in this case, I will just answer the question. In China, in early 1980s, as I said, we were collecting a lot of information. We collected blood samples, urine samples, food samples. We gave questionnaires, and we had information on death rates for the different parts of the country. And so we had a huge amount of data. And at that time, I was particularly interested in what effect diet had to do with cancer, heart disease, and these other diseases. The Chinese government provided to us about maybe about 50 or 60 different kinds of diseases. And it turns out that in that collection of data, we collected information on viruses for 4 of the diseases. One was the hepatitis B virus for liver cancer. Another was Epstein-Barr virus for nasopharyngeal cancer, herpes simplex virus for cervical cancer, and so forth. So, but we worked much more in depth on the hepatitis virus. Now, all the viruses, they have different symptoms. That's understood. Each virus has they create a different kind of problem. The virus that we were working with causes liver cancer, or liver cancer. And that was the area that I was particularly interested in. And it turned out we had a lot of correlations of different kinds of dietary factors related to the different diseases, in addition to information on the viruses. We had collected information on the hepatitis B virus in 2 ways. First, we had information on the antigen that in the blood. That's the active virus. So we were able to know how much active virus is in the blood of the 8,000 or so people. We also collected information on the antibody to the virus. So we had both antigen and antibody, both of them. And it turns out, and we measured this in different kinds of ways, it turns out that when people consume more plants in China, they had more antibodies. It was a very strong effect. The correlation between, let's say, vegetable consumption in China and antibody formation, the correlation was significant at the probability level of 0.001. So we measured in the blood of these people how much antigen they had. That's, those people are positive for the virus. And then how many had antibodies. And we can look at the ratio of antibodies to antigen, for example. We had correlations with lots of different food factors and other things biochemically. And what we found was that people consuming more plants were much, much more immune. It was direct evidence. It was really very impressive. And so it also turns out, and we just examined animal food intake itself, as well as other indicators of animal food intake. Now in China, at that time, the amount of animal food being consumed compared to the West was very low. But even under those conditions, when even a small amount of animal food was added to the diet in those certain counties where they used a little animal food, even a fairly small amount of animal food actually decreased the production of antibodies and increased the activity of the virus. So much so that the correlation between animal food intake and liver cancer was very high. Also, statistically, it was, the probability level was less than 0.001. So in other words, consuming vegetables created antibodies. Consuming animal-based food repressed or decreased the formation of antibodies, leaving more people with the active virus and therefore getting liver cancer. Now, one of the things, and that's number one thing that we did. And I think this is the only evidence that I'm aware of in the world that has made this observation, of this kind. And as I said today, I'm writing an op-ed piece for the Wall Street Journal and a couple other newspapers on this. So it'll be coming out, I think, very shortly. The other thing we did in the laboratory with this information, we had experimental animals in this case, mice. And we had mice that were either had the gene for liver cancer or did not. Two groups, either the ones had the genetic basis for liver cancer and the others did not. And it turned out that in the mice that had the gene for liver cancer, they formed liver cancer when they're fed high levels of protein. We could see it very quickly. The animals who fed the low levels of protein, no cancer, even though they had the gene. Just like it was when I showed you the first charts, the first tables I was telling you. That combination was very exciting because it suggests that if people were to change their diet, and the diet incidentally works very fast, as I said before. I don't know for sure in the case of viral diseases, but and everything else, it really happens rather quickly. So eating only plants reduces the risk for the virus endpoint. In this case, it was hepatitis B virus. But I am hypothesizing, suggesting that because this nutritional effect is so broad and so effective, and because all the viruses, in one way, they're the same. They come into a host, and the host produces a defense, usually with the immune system. They defend them, the host defends itself against the virus. And that's common to all viruses. So people who use a whole food, plant-based diet, low in protein, no animal food, they're going to be much, much better off. They may still get infected because at first there's no immunity there maybe. They may get infected, but the point is that when they do get infected, they will be able to create immunity much faster. So what I'm saying is that I think there's a tremendous opportunity here now with this problem, with the COVID virus problem, coronavirus. If people were to change their diets, they would not only increase their chance of getting immunity, if they get exposed to it. But the other thing that can happen, we know now from the evidence from Italy and from New York City especially, we know that the vast majority of the people who die of this coronavirus are older people. They're, above the age of 60 or 65. And all those people who are actually getting the disease and dying from the disease, they usually have heart disease, cancer, diabetes, overweight, so forth and so on. In other words, the people who are most susceptible to dying are the ones who have been using the wrong kind of diet during their life. So I'm saying, if we should get back to eating a whole food plant-based diet, I have to be careful because we haven't done exactly that kind of study to see it works. It'd be very hard to do that kind of study, I would say. But from the indirect evidence that I have for another virus and viruses in general, the evidence we have, I'm going to suggest, rather with a great deal of confidence, that people should see benefit from it. Right now, what we're doing, we're waiting on the development of chemicals or drugs to treat the disease. Yes, okay, I can understand doing that, but whether those chemicals work or don't work is open to question. We're also working really hard around the world trying to create a vaccine. Vaccines, yes, vaccines work for some time, but vaccines are only good for the virus that mostly is only good for the virus for which it was intended. If that virus changes and it has a mutation or another virus comes along, that same kind of treatment that same kind of vaccine will not work. So at present circumstances, we're depending on a drug to treat people with the disease, and I can understand that, especially people who are now very sick and they can't eat, and now we can work on that. But at the same time, the rest of us who are getting exposed or maybe going to get exposed, it'd be a good idea for us to start eating vegetables, a whole food plant-based diet.
Thank you very much. So this this means that the best one can do for their health is to adopt to follow a whole food diet. So
yes.
Let's say you have convinced everybody here. So what exactly is a whole food diet? Does cooking remove the wholeness of foods? Are there any side effects? This was actually Miss Prifty's question, and I would like her to take over to say this question because it's related. Eleni?
I would like to go to a question I have for you about people that are persuaded that they have to go to a whole food plant-based diet, but till now they used to consume a proper normal Western diet, very high in animal fat and animal protein. So because I have been working for 2 years with such families as a health coach, I'm about to finish my PhD in chemistry myself. So I do understand a little more, maybe than the others, your science. And a lot of my clients, when they change from Western diet to a whole food plant-based diet, they have some complaints of migraines, or they say they feel some more of fatigue, or they don't feel very vibrant enough. So I was wondering if a person that has been on a Western diet for decades, whether it is possible that such a body has been adapted, epigenetically adapted in that diet, in a Western diet, and has lost the ability of metabolizing or synthesizing certain nutrients, for example, certain amino acids that would be maybe very abundant at the when somebody consumes a lot of meat protein. Do you think that that is a scenario that is possible, or maybe we should just think that it's a psychological effect? I mean, people just miss their habits and they feel like that.
Yeah, that question is a good question. It's been asked many times, but actually it turns out that the older people can respond very well to this diet. And there, as you said, there are people who are really reluctant, really not very interested in doing this. I think that is partly a cultural, psychological issue. I mean, I can speak to some extent for myself. You know, I was already 50 years old when we switched, and it was hard to give up dairy and meat. But once we did it, and if we stay on it for, let's say, in some cases, maybe 1 month or 2 months, and you really do it right, then what happens, our body begins to become accustomed to it. And our preferences, our taste preferences begin to change.
All right.
And so under those circumstances, one can really see really significant changes. And after a month or two, then you get to the point where you don't want to go back. I mean, I can speak from personal experience. I've had many people say this. Once they made that transition, they like it so much they don't want to go back. And they don't even want to eat that old food. Now, this applies to a lot of people. I mean, still some people are going to say, no, I have problems, I this, that. But they're not doing it 100% and not having, I think, the willpower to stay with it.
All right.
It's a choice. It's a personal choice whether they want to do that or not. And as far as older people responding this way, they do really well. I just told you the example of my son, who's a doctor. In fact, he's a medical director of a program at a major medical school. And he worked with chronic kidney disease, and I mentioned that before. Just in a short period of time, these are all older people. And my friend, Dr. Esselton, Dr. Onish, most of the people they're working with, their heart disease, are over 60. And the results they get are spectacular. So I think I would have to say that those who find it exceedingly hard, they have to work a little harder. That's all I can say. Because it really works for all. It's especially important for older people. Well, it's important for everyone, children too.
Absolutely. Maybe more important for children.
Yes.
Thank you for that answer. And yeah, I'm actually gonna go to the children now, because my second question is about children. So as Anastasia has told you, we are passionate about trying to promote the whole food plant-based diet to kids. And in Greece, parents actually listen to the pediatricians like they're gods. Like parents do exactly what the pediatrician says. And the vast majority of pediatricians in Greece say that well, yes, okay, maybe the whole food plant-based diet is very good for adults because it reduces all these diseases. But they say, when we talk about kids, they are different. And pediatricians support that kids, because they are at this very important developmental stage, they support that kids need a lot of more protein and a lot of more fat. So I would like you to tell me whether that support is valid or not. And I would like you to also focus a little on the fat, because a whole food plant-based diet that doesn't have any isolated oil would be like low in fat, in 10-15% of the calories would be fat if we don't eat any added oils, right? So a lot of pediatricians say that kids should be up to 30% fat, and they support that at the official guidelines of the pediatric associations like the American Pediatric Association and other such authorities, that the kids should eat a lot more fat. So I would like your view on that. Are kids so different than adults?
No, they're not. As a matter of fact, I think the advice that children need 30% fat, I have to be very honest about it, it's ridiculous. That's the amount of fat that we actually need, and this has been demonstrated now for many years. The absolute amount of fat that we need is only about 6 or 7% of the diet for fat. We need very little, and we can get that from food plenty of, well enough. In Greece, obviously, you have your olives and so forth, and you can get, excuse me just a second here to make this go off. Sure. So we have plant foods that have plenty of oil and if you will, in them. Nuts, obviously, is a good source of oil. All kinds of nuts, avocado, olives. These kinds of things are plenty enough fat. And in terms of the amount we need, the thing about fat, what we do as human beings, whichever country we're in, the kids will start in and the parents are eating, let's say, high-fat diets, and obviously the children are too. And so fat is addictive. Salt is addictive. And to some extent, sugar is too. So if the children start getting used to consuming high-fat diets, that's what they want. They just feel very strongly. That's what they have to have. And we all do when we start getting older. We did that for several years. That's what we want. But that's what really changes in a matter of at least say 1 to 2 months, 3 months or so. We lose that desire. I mean, people just have to try it. And that's the way it works. And adding a lot of oil, extra oil, you said you don't do so much of that, but we do a lot of that in this country. And that's not good. So I don't know how to answer other than answer that, because the basic science basically says we only need about, let's say 6 or 7% total calories as fat. We just do not need,
That's
and we
amazing.
surely don't need protein. We don't need the animal protein. We get all the animal protein that we need. In fact, we get the ideal levels of protein from plants. Almost any kind of plants, even tubers.
Yes, even potatoes, you mean, eh? Tubers are
That's right.
potatoes, the various potatoes.
That's right. They sure do. They're low in protein. Most of it's grains and potatoes and so forth. Sometimes we say those are low in protein. And it's sort of true. It is low in protein compared to meats. But that's the kind of protein we should be consuming. And that's the amount. That's what nature intended.
We'll come back to the meats later. And we'll come back to Eleni's question later. I want to ask something that is relevant with what you discussed about fat. How come the guidelines have such excessive amounts of fat? I know that here and there you have written about the history of the guidelines and the history of these 35%, that it is very more palatable than the 20%. But is this information somewhere combined in one article, for example? If not, could we have it sometime in the future? Because we get into these conversations, and it would be very helpful to have it condensed in one article, like why the guidelines, the USDA guidelines and all the other ones in the world have such high levels of fat for both adults and kids. Can you please explain this quite,
Are you talking about the United States guidelines and more or less
Yes.
the European guidelines?
Yes.
Well, in the United States, we have so-called dietary guidelines, as you know. And I spent about 20 years working very closely with these groups at the government level. In fact, I was also on several of those expert panels. So I know how it works. I know very well. I know where the influence comes from. And it turns out the guidelines in this country, in the United States, for example, are controlled by the Agriculture Department. That's the Department of Agriculture. The Department of Agriculture is basically promotes the livestock industry. They don't like this. They sort of admit it. Yeah, there's some, they'll say, yes, we should eat more vegetables and fruits, but they never say how much more. And they surely will not allow scientists really to be going too far saying the kind of things that I do. I did that. And I was on these panels and I made my point of view known. And so there was pushback in my case. They tried to get me fired from the university, but they couldn't because I had tenure. They tried to get me thrown out of my professional society. Right at the time I was being nominated for the president of the society. They said they didn't succeed. They tried to, in one case they did, they withdrew funding from the National Institute. All of my research was funded by the NIH, public money. In one case, I had got a grant for $7 million to extend the work in China, and they pulled that back as well. And the reason all that happened, is because the government guidelines are basically controlled by industry. And they do that as follows. In the United States, you may not know this in Greece, and I think to some extent you may find this in Europe, but I don't think it's as bad in Europe as it is in the United States. In the United States, right now, as a result of a Supreme Court decision in 2010, 10 years ago, corporations were allowed to contribute money to political campaigns, all the money they wanted to do. Corporations and rich people. And so as a result, the politicians that we tend to elect are the ones for which the most money has been spent. And of course, the industry wants to usually put their money into conservative political groups. And so they want to keep their business going. They don't like what I say. They don't like what other people say. And so this has been that way for a long time. In the new book that I'm just now going to be published in December, I explain that more carefully. What was the history of this movement? And we've got to find a way to disaggregate as much as possible public interest from private interest. And private interest, I mean by that, the corporate interest. And I know it's very strong in Europe. I've spent a lot of time in Europe myself, and the corporate sector is very strong. But with the world's people just got to know that whereas we have to have and that's why I come back to this business end of things. I'm very much of a free enterprise, free market kind of a person. That's my political persuasion on the one hand, but on the other hand, we have excessive control at the present time by the marketplace over public policy. And I've seen it firsthand. One thing I might mention, for 1 year, some years ago, it was rotating. I was actually the congressional liaison, the #1 person for the medical and biomedical research communities. I was the liaison to the U.S. Congress. So I know how that works very well. And I know there's a lot of good people in government would like to change, but it's very difficult when the politicians are elected and they control to a great extent who's appointed and who's not appointed. And I have to say, right now, I'm going to say this, and it's probably, you don't want to, you may not, this is not a time for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyhow because it has a lot to do with science. We have the worst president that I think certainly our country has ever seen. I don't know what the feeling is in Europe about him, but he is one of them that's really pushing to the right. He's against science. So that's my answer.
A lot of people believe the same.
Absolutely.
About your president. You will be relieved to know. Okay. So let's go back to Eleni, and then go back to a student that asked about something about genes. Okay, Eleni.
Yes, yes.
The
I will,
practical issues.
yes. So I will go for one more question. So in the beginning, you mentioned that supplements are definitely something that we should generally avoid. And you also mentioned that salt is something that we should avoid also. So my question is about iodine. I know it's a very reductionist question, but I have seen that a lot of people who read the science, when they go towards a whole food plant-based diet, they worry about B12, which, okay, we have covered it many times. And they also worry about iodine, because we know that iodine concentration in the plant food depends on where they have been grown. So today we don't know where our plants are growing. Possibly they are growing to an artificial soil, totally. So it's a very high chance that they are maybe they lack the iodine that they should have. And I'm actually asking mostly about the population that should get more iodine. Like, for example, the breastfeeding women, I am right now breastfeeding my daughter. The guideline says that we should almost get double the amount of iodine. I mean, for a normal person would be 150 micrograms, and for a breastfeeding woman, the guideline says that it should be about 290, almost double. So would you worry about iodine? And if yes, what would be the best source? Would you suggest an iodine supplement or the use of iodine salt?
Well, I can't answer all of that. I'm not familiar with some of the details of that question, but I do know that historically, as I'm sure you know, historically, when we produce food locally, the people who are away from the sea, where there's more iodine, obviously, that they were more likely to suffer some iodine deficiency. And so that was a time when iodine salt was considered, and we've had that product for many, many years now, many decades. I believe I accept the idea that there are cases where iodine supplementation may be useful, especially for people living away from the seacoast. I think that's less important now because certainly in the United States, the food that we get comes from all over the place. And that's what most people eat. So I'm not sure it's a big issue. On the question concerning iodine and breastfeeding or pregnant women, yeah, I don't know enough about that, and I really hesitate to say. And I certainly don't know the numbers. So I don't want to quite go there actually, because whatever. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's a very specialized category of people, I can imagine.
Right.
Vegan and breastfeeding at the same time, I think we are not many.
Well, can I say one more thing on the vitamin B12, incidentally, you mentioned that too. Yes, vitamin B12 supplements are probably useful. Yeah.
Sure. What about omega-3 supplements? Is it time to talk about this now?
Yes, okay.
Difficult nutrients.
Well, the omega-3s, as you know, are anti-inflammatory. Omega-6 is pro-inflammatory. And actually, the major metric for that understanding is the ratio of one to the other. And so in the modern Western diet, in many cases, certainly in the United States, and I think in Europe pretty much too, the ratio of omega-6, which is pro-inflammatory, to omega-3, which is anti-inflammatory, that ratio now is around 15 to 1, 20 to 1, maybe. the more animal food we consume and the more processed foods we consume, the more oils we consume, that ratio has become very high. And so it's, right now our diets are very pro-inflammatory because of too much omega-6s. Under those circumstances, if one takes a omega-3 supplement, one can make an argument that it might be a little helpful, to correct that balance. On the other hand, if we're consuming the right kind of diet, all plants and so forth, that ratio is much, much better. And I don't see any evidence that omega-3 supplements is necessary. In fact, I know of some evidence to show that it can be a problem. It can, increase, for example, diabetes for one thing. That's a fairly big study shown that. And so we don't use any omega-3 supplements. And I think most, and if it works at all, it's only working on those people who are already consuming a very bad diet. And so what it's doing is just helping to correct a bad situation, but not very much.
If we are pursuing a whole food diet, should we actively pursue those foods that are high in omega-3s? If we are already on a good diet, do we need to go for the high omega-3 foods?
No,
like
I don't think so.
Seeds?
Yeah, I don't think so. But on the other hand, I have some friends who are familiar with this, professionals who, they use things like flaxseed, and things like this, something of that sort. But and it may be okay. I have no opinion, but it wouldn't hurt to use some of that.
Okay. Okay, we have a question from Poppy. Let me tell her name. It's Poppy Stamelu. She has a very interesting question about people living 90 or 100 years and not being in a whole food diet, quite the opposite. So would you like, Poppy, to put your own question here? And it will be a very nice opportunity to discuss about I would say, the relative lack of some people. Poppy? She's not here with us.
Well, I think the question is, usually I hear the question is that there are some people who are 90 to 100 and maybe even still smoking. Or maybe they had, not a very good diet, but they lived to a very old age. That may happen. And, it just shows that some people are all individuals. Maybe some people are more resistant to those problems than others. But I must say this, for every one person that lives to be 95 doing the wrong thing, there's going to be about 20 others who's not going to make it. And we never know who we are really. We don't know how long we're going to live. And so it's like playing the odds. I'd rather go for the odds where, 19 out of 20 people live a normal life and a long life. And I know of some data, for example, from Loma Linda studies in California, you may know them, that the individuals who were mostly vegan, women lived about 12 years longer on average than men. Men lived about, they lived about 12 years younger by being on a vegan diet. Men lived about 7 years longer. And so I don't know how reliable those data are, but there's other studies sort of suggest the same thing. So in general, we should not take our chances, I guess. Because there's no point to be that one person out of 20 or one person out of 30 who might be able to do the wrong thing, then hope to live to be 95 or 100. That makes no sense, even though it may happen sometimes.
Okay. May I ask you about the the cultured meat. I mean, can a cultured meat, which is a trend lately, and it is supposed to remove the obstacles of people adopting a non-animal diet, can this be considered ever a whole food, like having the benefits of plants? What do you think? Will it be healthy, or I don't know, I'm a bit confused on this.
Are you talking about cancer?
Cultured meat, the cell meat, the clean meat, which is cultured with cells from animals, and it is supposed to save the world because the world cannot change their habits towards a plant-based diet. So we need to provide an alternative to flesh, which is not taken from animals, but which is grown on in the lab.
Right.
Yeah. Could this be healthy, you think?
Not very much, to be honest about it, because if at all, and I don't think it does make a difference, because the protein in the animals fed, in rangeland and so forth, their protein is exactly the same as the animals that are put in a feedlot and, pumped up with a lot of high concentrate or, rich foods, if you will, to fatten them up. And so the ones who are the animals in the pasture, one can make a theoretical argument, maybe a little bit better. And I'm very much aware of that. There's a man in this country, pretty well known, Michael Pollan, who advocated that. And others have suggested that. But in reality, he doesn't believe, to begin with, he doesn't believe for what I say anyhow. He doesn't want to believe it. In fact, twice in two different audiences, I can tell you this much. When people asked him about me, he told them and shouted out at the audience, "Don't read the China study." So he's and I just heard him on the television the other night when he's been interviewed, and he says he doesn't live that diet. There's a lot of people that are just going to say what the public want to hear. They can sell books that way, because people like to read things. They like to read good things about their bad habits. And the range cattle feed, I could understand in a theoretical sense that that kind of meat might be a little bit better, but I don't see any scientific evidence to support that at all. And if there is a difference, it's got to be very, very small.
Okay. Could you please elaborate a little bit about what you said before about the plant protein, the 20% plant protein and the 5% and the 20% animal protein? I would like you to elaborate a little bit on the composition of protein. For example, if we take 20% plant protein and we engineer it to resemble the animal protein, how will this behave? How would this behave in the experiments?
Well, we did something like that many years ago. We were comparing wheat protein, for example, with casein. And casein, under those rules, was considered to be 100%. It's an ideal protein. It's an animal protein. And the wheat protein was considered to be less adequate. It had to be combined, let's say, with legumes. And that was the old story. Combination.
Yes.
And so we did that study, and the wheat protein did not turn on the cancer. The casein, that's the animal food, did turn on the cancer. So the wheat protein had an advantage. So wheat protein is deficient, and one of the amino acids that's deficient is called lysine. So what we did, we had a third group. We fed them wheat protein, but we supplemented them with lysine. And it turned out when we did that, the wheat protein was acting just about the same as the animal protein. So it led me to most plant proteins are sort of low in one or two different amino acids. It led me to the belief that rather than thinking about that as a mistake or, something that's not in our favor, it's actually probably a good thing. because nature, I've come back to this point of view that the way that nutrition works in the body is the way that was the natural way during our evolutionary period. And for consuming plants, we don't want to overload things with all the amino acids to begin with, because it stimulates cancer growth. It increases growth hormones, which are not good, because that turns on cancer too, and it does a lot of other things. So we don't need this so-called ideal level of protein. In fact, that's simply not good. It's better to be a little bit short in things, and that gives apparently nature a chance to adjust and use it as it wishes. So I don't believe in the idea of adding, something else to the plant protein to make it better. It's already perfect to begin with. If we add more stuff to it, it only makes it worse.
Yeah, so this combination of proteins that you mentioned is one of many myths that most of us have been raised with.
That's right.
Isn't it? And there are several of these myths, like the heme iron that is better than the non-heme iron, and
Right.
The fiber in the foods that is better to avoid it because it creates a lot of problems, blah, blah, blah. And then there is the myth of the keto diet that is supposed to help people lose weight. And I would like you, because one of our students, Marlis, wanted to ask about this, and I would like you to comment on this keto diet, because it's an interesting topic.
Yeah, I have followed that keto diet story quite closely. Dr. Robert Atkins started that in 1973. And it was a diet that he said that the problems with our weight and other issues, the problem was that we were consuming too much carbohydrate, as you know, and that we should decrease the carbohydrate, which meant in turn that it was okay to increase fat and protein, animal protein. And he was saying that because that's what people wanted to hear. That's what they were doing anyhow. So his book was quite popular in the beginning. That was in 1973, but during the next 3 or 4 years, some of the scientists and other people criticized him pretty severely. So he kind of disappeared until 1992 or 3. He came back with a new book. And again, it really took off. And then I learned, he lived in New York City. And I'm about 4 hours from New York City at the university. And the students, I was teaching upper class nutrition at that time. And the students were asking that question. This is 1993, 1994. What about Dr. Atkins? And then one of the students in my class that first year said she had gone to Dr. Atkins' clinic because she was interested. And what she found was that there were about 30 chairs in that waiting room. And all these people had intravenous tubes into their veins. And he was advocating for these people that if he analyzed their blood, that he could tell them which vitamin they were deficient in. And then he would sell them a vitamin. And so and the first student that told me that one year, she told the rest of the class, she said, it was very hard to get out of his office without agreeing to pay $150 a month, for a supply of supplements. So that was the first year. The second year, I was asked again by another student, what do you think about the Atkins diet? And she told the same thing, but this time she said the price was $200 a month. And so then I come to find out Atkins himself never wrote a scientific paper in his life. He was never a researcher of any kind. He was not trained in nutrition. And his wife was very proud of the fact that he never published in a scientific journal. He was actually anti-science. And as a result of all of that, he was selling his vitamins and he made a huge fortune. He died at a relatively young age, at least compared to some of us, from a heart attack. So he wasn't doing very well, I can tell you that. He was way overweight. And but nonetheless, he did demonstrate one thing, and that was that people like to hear good things about their bad habits. They want to eat a lot of protein, want to eat a lot of fat, etc. And they don't like plants, so therefore they buy his book and they believe in it. And since that time, there's been at least another 8 or 10 books along the same line. One of them is the Paleo Diet, you may have heard of. I've actually debated that guy twice. The Paleo Diet, the South Beach Diet, the Protein Power Diet, and there's some, I imagine in Greece you must have something like that. And most recently, they call it the Keto Diet. And the Keto Diet is where when you're consuming meat, then in that particular case, it's breaking down the fat in the tissues, forms ketone bodies, and so forth. And so therefore, they use the Keto Diet. That's been sort of popular for the last 4 or 5 years in this country. And what it does do, it actually causes some weight loss. And most people who try the Atkins diet will see some loss of weight. And actually, that's the one thing that that's the number one thing that people want to do is they don't care about anything else. They just want to lose weight. So they go on this diet, and it turns out that those people on that diet are actually consuming less calories. When they consume less calories, yeah, they're going to lose some weight. That'll go on for a while, but then most of the people are tired of it after a few months. Maybe they lost some weight and they give up and they don't keep it. But still, the keto diet makes a lot of money for people because the customers want to believe in it. They buy the book. But, and they call it the low carb diet or the keto diet. Even some doctors are using it, I understand, from time to time. It's a bad diet because if you compare, as I showed in a couple of those graphs, the higher the animal protein consumption, which is what the keto diet is, the greater the risk for a number of different diseases. It's dangerous. So I don't have any respect at all for the keto diet, none.
Yeah. I see the questions that the students have prepared, and there is a pattern emerging in most of them about what do we need to do as individuals and as communities? Why there is no labeling on meat that it is detrimental to our health? What about dairy? The same. I see a lot of questions like this. Why legislators have not legislated against these foods? I think you have already replied to these questions. You said about.
I think I have one more question if there is time. Just
yes.
let me know.
Yes.
Should I go for it now?
Yes, shoot
Okay.
ahead.
Yes. So my final last question would be if we have any evidence of how little animal protein is safe to use. Because a lot of people, exactly because they are not very willing to move to a whole food plant-based diet, they are trying to reduce animal intake. A lot of people say, okay, I'll stop eating red meat, I'll go to chicken, or I'll stop eating chicken and red meat and I'll eat only fish. So if we have any valid scientific evidence that there is an amount of animal protein that we can still eat and that can be safe.
That's a very good question. And I've been asked that many times. I also know that story too from a personal level because my wife and I started changing, as I said before, very simply in the beginning, we just cut down on red meat. It took us about 10 years to make the change. We cut down on red meat and we were eating only chicken and still using dairy and fish. And then pretty soon the chicken was always so high in fat. So we cut that down and then we just had fish maybe. As time passed, I was getting used to the diet, of course, and I liked it. I liked it even better. and I could see I quit dairy too. That was a major thing. And so I know from a personal level. I think from the more general level, can you repeat that part of your question again? What you said, why is the way?
Yes, if there is a very low amount of animal
low amount of protein, yeah.
Yeah, that we can safely eat. If someone doesn't want to go to whole food plant-based
Right.
diet, can we say once a month or once every 2 months? He can eat some.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's a good question, and I think that I can't cite evidence from the scientific literature. I like to rely on the science as much as I can. And I cannot find evidence that a person who does it occasionally, that they're any worse off. I can't say that. So on the other hand, I do know that addictions for food is pretty strong. And it's, so if they do it once a month, then pretty soon it's 2 times a month, and then it's 2 times a week or whatever. They tend to lose, and it's sort of similar to the effect of stopping smoking. At first, if they want to stop smoking, the best thing they do is they stop completely. If they say, okay, I'm going to cut down, only going to have 1 or 2 cigarettes a day or something like that, I guess some people could do that, but then all the evidence shows that people eventually go back to smoking a lot. And these are habits of addiction, I think, more than anything. If we get addicted to something, no matter what it is, whether it's what we're eating, what we're smoking, or what we do this or that, addictions are pretty powerful, as you know. And sometimes it's just we have to face our own addictions and ask ourselves, you know, are we so wedded to that particular addiction we have to have it? I don't think I don't like to say this because I know my goal is a 0. But I also know that there's some people may have a little bit from time to time, and I can't say that they're worse off because I don't find the science for that. So, but I do know that going 100% compared to on average, that's where the best health is, very clearly. There's no question about it. As I said before, you know, some people might live to be 95 and they still smoked. So I don't know, it's sort of that kind of question. It's better just to do it and stay with it.
Okay. We have a question. Sorry, Eleni?
I'm all covered. I have no more questions, and I'm really happy that I had this honor to take these questions.
Okay. We have a question from a student, from Nikki. Nikki, could you please give your question?
Yes, of course. First of all, I would like to say that it is a pleasure meeting you. Which are the designated actions both government and citizens should take in order the citizens to be informed from the proper nutrition choices? Thank you.
Okay. Right. Well, I will tell you, of course, my own experience in the United States, but as far as what the public can do or the government can do that can help, I have some specific recommendations that I've been pushing in this country, and I think they may apply in Greece too. Namely, medical schools should teach nutrition. There's not a single medical school in the United States that teaches nutrition, not one. And it's generally true in Western and European countries, I think. The nutrition is just not really being taught. I think Lithuania is one of the first countries now is adopting some teaching. That gentleman, he was the man chiefly responsible for that was Minister of Health in Lithuania. I was there lecturing, actually. He then became the chief health officer for the European Union. And he actually put a praise for my book, so he was very much in favor of that. So Lithuania is now introducing some. I would like to suggest that governments in other countries should insist that medical schools teach nutrition. Now, since the medical schools don't do that, but also medical schools tend to get government support, obviously, in I guess all countries. The government has a means by which they can say to the schools, either you teach nutrition, an acceptable kind of nutrition, or we're going to cut your funds. That's one way, get medical school. The second way is to, I think this is not a problem in Europe. In our country, in the United States, we're living in a strongly capitalist system, as you know. Doctors, they charge for their reimbursement. They charge their fees according to the different medical specialties that they use, for diagnosing a patient. There's no specialty that has nutrition as a medical specialty. And so therefore, doctors are not able to collect reimbursement fees. They can't get compensated if they start advising their patients on nutrition. That's the second thing that could be done. The reimbursement of physicians should be made such that they can be paid for those services in the area of nutrition. I think it's less likely in Europe because you have a more socialized medical system than we do, obviously. And I'm not sure that, doctors, if they want to advise their patients on nutrition, they're probably better able to do that maybe than here. The third thing is that in the United States, most of our big money for research comes from National Institutes of Health. In fact, I think that is the largest source of funding in the world for medical research. And all of my research is funded by the National Institutes of Health, except for some from the cancer societies. And there, the NIH doesn't have an institute for nutrition. So the research emphasis at the level of the government doesn't exist. And then I would have a fourth one too, and that is to change the Supreme Court ruling that we now have that allows rich corporations to buy politicians, essentially. But other than that, I should tell one more thing. My oldest son, who was trained in economics, actually, in government, he has now organized a group of so-called wellness groups. He calls them pods, P-O-D-S. He's held wellness groups, and there's now about 400 pods, mostly in the United States, but also there's about 20 other countries now have some pods. And I don't know whether Greece has pods or not, maybe in Athens or something like that, but people are interested in this idea. If you could go to the website, Plant Pure Communities, you'll see in there if you want to form a pod at the local level. It's kind of nice. We're just now, and I'm on that board as well. What the pods do is they meet usually once a month, maybe 15, 20, 25, 30 people, whatever, in a community. And they maybe exchange some meals. Maybe they just have some discussion. Maybe they listen to a lecture. Maybe they want to be advocates for something, whatever. And those pods are now turning out to be quite good, I think. So if the people in the public want to have something at the local level, have some fun, with friends and family and neighbors and so forth, they could organize one of these pods and just once a month have a meeting talking about different things. Let's see, what else? And then the other thing is just getting people educated in this area. That's what our online course is. That's for that purpose. So there's different things. It's now they're really starting to develop, I think, now better than. I also should say, incidentally, the pods. I say there are about 400 pods we have now in the United States and abroad, and there's about 250,000 members. So it's getting to be quite big. And right now, they are sponsoring a so-called Jumpstart Program, whereby individual members of the pods can sign up for that, and they can get the food. In this particular case, the food is actually sold in a major stores in this country. It's the one that my son produces, so there's a potential conflict there. But his food is selling, and but he's using the funding for supporting socially responsible work that goes back into the pods. So this line of food is all plant-based. It's low oil, no sugar, essentially, and it's very healthy. And so people can buy that here in this country. It was just about to become offered in some measures It's been measured, and there's 3 big major stores and chains that are offering this food now, but there's another 4 that were about to sign it when this coronavirus came along and sort of ruined the opportunity. But he's going to get back to that, and that kind of food is available. You can order it. It's cheaper. It's cheaper than what other people buy, and it's very good food. Tastes good. It's very healthy. So there's a bunch of different things people can do. Either work at the government level. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I wanted to take this a bit further. I mean, we see that large companies, the future of food, of large companies, is a bit a struggle between trying to produce food which is healthier, like reducing sodium and sugar or whatever, and the struggle to produce food that is functional and tries to solve problems. Do you think that people who understand the importance of nutrition, whole nutrition, can really make a change to the food industry? Like, do you think that people like your son can challenge the existing, let's say, strategic plans of the big industrial food companies?
That's a very good question, and it's difficult. It's challenging. Yes, you're quite correct. So that's one of the reasons I really am enthusiastic for education. Either people can take courses and start to learn about it, or for the government to start doing the right thing, so more people get to know it. In this country, I think it's unfortunately, there's a lot of bias in our system that's existed for a long time, and so the industry has so much control that they will advertise and they'll say their food is good and so forth and so on. All they're trying to do is sell something and make money, let's face it. They're not necessarily, they'll sometimes say, oh, this food is good or it's healthy and so forth and so on. But when you look a little more carefully, it's not really true. And my son is doing it, and he's starting to have some success. I'm hoping it'll keep on going, because we've now doubled or tripled, actually, maybe, on some figures, this the percent of people now consuming a plant-based food in this country. But we're still kind of behind the times. Other countries are doing better. I just was in Taiwan. Taiwan is a country that's quite proud of their record. They once 15% of the people declare to do something, that's usually called the tipping point, as you might know. And once that happens, and if it's a good thing, people then just start discovering it's a good thing. It kind of spreads like the virus, and so we just have to keep working at it, I guess, is the way to do it.
I guess
what you're doing right now, that's exactly the right thing to do.
Well, I'm trying to influence demand, and at a later stage supply as well, because all the students that leave this class, they're going to do something.
Right.
I hope they will do something which is towards this aim of eliminating nutritional confusion, of increasing the healthy choices, of finding ways to engineer behavior modification towards healthy choices, things like that. This is my wish, and I hope I'm working towards this. But I strongly understand that demand has to change before supply, which is the most important thing. So no matter how many big giant food corporations are out there, if demand is educated, if consumers are educated, there will be no market for bad products. And here is one question that I wanted to give you in the beginning when I asked you about the guidelines. What would be, this is a bit funny, it's a bit funny question, but what would be the good label, a good label for you on a product that has more than one ingredient? For example, a bread. What kind of information should this label convey to simple people?
Well, in this country, it's interesting. The word plant-based is becoming more popular now than it was before. And I was the one who started that in 1980 when I was on a government body. And I say that because I was interviewed by the Washington Post. Others know that that's where it started. And I don't use the word vegan or vegetarian, to be honest about it, because even though the motivation for being a vegan or vegetarian mostly was based on ethical reasoning, of course, although in more recent times it also includes personal health. But I think, and so that's why I came up with the whole food plant-based, because I wanted people to think about it from the context of science, not just on the basis of ethics. Ethics, as I say, is a good reason, of course, but yeah, I'm not. It's hard, kind of hard to sell ethics to people. Questioning their own ethics, if you will. So I think the label. That's why I came up with the plant-based thing. And so, in terms of what to put on the package, that actually is now having some appeal. There's a company that started here in this country, make a plant-based meat alternative, and they've raised a lot of money. A couple of companies did that, and so there's some interest. Demand is now increasing here for this kind of product, and I quite agree with you. If you don't have demand, forget the supply idea. It's all about demand, and and I do see some changes here, and I don't know. I think this present coronavirus thing is so serious, and it's got people so afraid, the world over. And if I could just get the message out, and I'm trying to right now, that hey, start to eat the right food, and you won't be suffering the same consequences. It's quite clear because we already have that information from China. And so just using that kind of argument at a time like this could be useful, I think.
Yes. Well, for me, it's a bit saddening that I'm talking to students about externalities, and I feel that I feel that people who have decided to be vegans are the least responsible for this situation, and they should be at least acknowledged that they don't contribute to so many problems.
Right.
I feel a bit sad because I have 2 kids, and I have to keep them at home, and I don't send them to school, and I have to tell them why they don't see their friends and whatever. And I feel like I'm the receiver of these externalities, for which I teach at the university, the negative externalities of other people's choices. So anyway, I just wanted to say it off, take it off my chest. I don't expect an answer, but if you want to say something, please do.
Well, anyhow, I really very much appreciate this, and I do say that if now's the time, especially when a lot of people happen to stay home, if you will, and maybe they have more time, it's a time to start experimenting with preparing this kind of food. I mean, now there's a lot of cookbooks, with excellent recipes. You can get them online too, as you probably know. So it's just maybe, the pod idea. I like the pod idea because then you get a group of people meeting, as I say, for every month or a couple of weeks or something like that. And when you get like-minded people together in a community and just start talking about different things you could do, it's building a community. And I also believe that demand can be affected by having a community activity of some sort that people really enjoy having. And so I think you look online, because I know if you don't have any pods in Greece,
We
maybe
will do it.
yeah,
We will
try
create
that.
them.
And incidentally, on that pod idea, that's my oldest son who did that, and he has an executive director of the nonprofit, but he also has a son, is our grandson, who has just created a so-called computer platform that will be available to all the pods around the world, and so that they can talk to each other. I think that's a great idea. And so, once you become a pod and you're on there, soon, it's not right now, it's not quite available, but you can get on there and compare ideas with people elsewhere in the world. I know one thing, this has become a very international idea now, as you know. I mean, partly because my book has sold been translated in so many different languages. I basically am talking to people all over the world, from Mongolia to Colombia, South America. It's really interesting. It's an international idea because we all eat food and we all like to be healthy.
Yes. I think we should not keep you any longer, although we would love to have you here for the whole night.
I have to leave myself.
Yeah. So, okay.
Okay. Okay.
So, I want to thank you very, very much. This was an amazing opportunity for all of us, once again, to be with you. And we're very grateful for what you did for us and for what you're doing for everybody on this planet. We're going to work on what we heard from you today and what you have written. And be sure that we're going to get better in what needs to be done. So,
right.
Yeah, that's it from me. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. I really appreciated it.
Thanks.
Okay.
Say hi to everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.